6:47 a.m. Strait of Hormuz, northern transit lane, 21 miles wide. 3 Iranian IRGCN warships just cut across the bow of USS Harry S. Truman at less than 900 meters, forcing the carrier to emergency back its engines for the first time in a decade. A 100,000-ton warship at sea does not stop quickly. At the speed Truman was making, the emergency engine reversal took 4.1 nautical miles to bring her to a controlled halt. In those 4.1 nautical miles, the carrier strike group nearly became the opening act of a shooting war. Welcome to Navy Poverline, where we go inside the moments when naval doctrine meets calculated aggression, and the outcome depends on decisions made in seconds. The Strait of Hormuz transit is not a casual operation. When a U.S. carrier strike group moves through that 21-mile-wide channel, the planning begins 72 hours in advance. The transit is one of the most heavily choreographed movements in naval operations. Air assets in overwatch, attack submarines repositioning to clear the path, destroyers and cruisers in assigned screening positions, speed and course optimized to minimize time in the high-threat corridor. Every ship's captain and every air wing commander knows the plan. The carrier moves at the center of a precisely arranged formation that has evolved through decades of practice into something close to a science. What the science cannot fully account for is an adversary who is willing to put his ships in front of yours and dare you to maintain course. The Iranian Navy and IRGCN have studied U.S. carrier transit procedures in the Strait in detail. They know the formation geometry, they know the speed profiles, they know the sequence of air assets that appear overhead during the transit. That knowledge, combined with the geography of the strait itself, the shallow water, the traffic separation scheme, the restricted maneuvering room, gives a determined adversary a specific tool, the ability to create a collision scenario that forces the carrier to choose between holding course and accepting a catastrophic accident, or maneuvering in a way that disrupts the entire transit formation. It is the maritime equivalent of stepping in front of a moving truck on a narrow road and watching the driver brake. The 3 Iranian vessels were a Mauj-class frigate and 2 Sina-class fast-attack missile boats. The Mauj displaces 1,500 tons. The Sina boats displace approximately 275 tons each. The combined mass of all 3 Iranian ships is roughly 2,050 tons. USS Harry S. Truman displaces 102,000 tons. The physics of a collision scenario between a carrier and a frigate produces one outcome. The Iranians knew that. The entire operation was based on the certainty that the U.S. side would not allow that outcome, that the carrier would maneuver or reduce speed to avoid the collision geometry that the Iranian ships were creating. The IRGCN commanders were betting their ships and their lives on a prediction about American decision-making. The intelligence picture in the 48 hours before the transit had not flagged this specific threat. The Mauj-class frigate had been observed leaving Bandar Abbas 18 hours prior and was tracked on a southward heading consistent with a patrol toward the Gulf of Oman. The 2 Sina-class boats had departed a smaller facility on Keshem Island at 0430 that morning. Their departure was logged by the P-8 Poseidon on patrol overhead, and the report reached the Transit Coordination Cell at 0447. The Transit Coordination Cell assessed the 3 contacts as possible interference patrol, monitor and report. Not a formal threat elevation, not a course change recommendation. The transit began at 6:11. Truman's formation entered the northern end of the traffic separation scheme with the standard geometry. Destroyers, USS Roosevelt and USS Stout in the lead screening positions. The Ticonderoga-class cruiser, USS Anzio, on the carrier's starboard beam. Attack submarine, USS New Hampshire, running silent on a track 8 nautical miles ahead. At 0, the surface warfare coordinator aboard USS Roosevelt flagged the contact at 0642 and attempted Channel 16 contact. No response. At 0648, both Sina-class boats turned northwest from their position 12 nautical miles to the east. They were running at 39 knots. Their courses were not identical. They were slightly divergent in a way that would bring them to different positions relative to the formation. The geometry was becoming clear in the tactical picture aboard Roosevelt. The Mauj was on a course to cut across the carrier's bow. The 2 Sina boats appeared to be taking up positions on the formation's flanks, not directly threatening, but boxing in the maneuvering space. Roosevelt's CO informed Truman's battle group commander at 0649. At 0651, the Mauj-class frigate was at 7 nautical miles in closing. It had not responded to 4 radio challenges on both English and Farsi frequencies. Its course had not changed. Its fire control radar was active, not locked on a specific target, but in wide area search mode. The battle group commander faced the central tactical question: hold the transit course and trust that the Iranian frigate would turn at the last moment, or maneuver the carrier formation, accepting that doing so under Iranian pressure would establish a precedent with significant long-term consequences. Holding course with a 102,000-ton ship had its own risks. If the Iranian frigate did not turn, the collision scenario was not recoverable by the carrier's helmsman alone. Emergency backing at full power requires time and distance that may not exist. He ordered the formation to maintain course and speed at 12 knots. He simultaneously ordered both forward destroyers to close on the Iranian frigate's track at best speed, not to engage, but to physically interpose themselves between the Mauj and the carrier. 2 destroyers moving to intercept position communicated something that radio calls had not. Roosevelt and Stout accelerated. The Mauj continued closing. At 0655, it was at 4 nautical miles. At 0658, it was at 2 nautical miles, and its course had not deviated by a single degree. At 0659 and 40 seconds, it crossed 1 nautical mile. The officer of the deck aboard Truman initiated emergency engine backing at 702 seconds, before the battle group commander's order, acting on his own authority under imminent collision regulations. This is the correct action under maritime law when collision is imminent and avoidance requires immediate action. The 4 propeller shafts of a Nimitz-class carrier, each driven by a 52,000 shaft horsepower steam turbine, do not reverse instantly. The maneuver takes time. The carrier began decelerating. The maneuver was logged at full emergency backing power. The Mauj-class frigate passed across Truman's bow at 847 meters at 0741 seconds. 847 meters. At the speeds involved and the size of the vessels, that margin was not sufficient for comfort by any standard of maritime safety or professional judgment. The crews on both ships had a clear sightline to each other. The 2 at 0701, after the Mauj had cleared the bow, the Iranian frigate reduced speed and turned to a parallel course alongside the carrier's formation, not intercepting but shadowing, approximately 1,100 meters to port. The battle group commander now had a carrier that had just completed an emergency engine reversal, 2 Iranian missile boats sitting 600 meters off its beam, and an Iranian frigate shadowing the formation inside the transit lane. He had 3 options. The first was to continue the transit with the Iranian vessels in their current positions, accepting the shadow and completing the Strait passage while maintaining radio challenges and logging the incident. The second was to reverse course, exit the transit lane, and hold position outside the Strait until the situation was resolved diplomatically, or the Iranian vessels departed. The third was to directly and explicitly challenge the Sina-class boat's position using the destroyers, moving Roosevelt and Stout to within 400 meters of the Sina boats and using that proximity to communicate, through action rather than radio, that their current position alongside the carrier was not acceptable. He chose the third option for the Sina boats and the first for the transit. Roosevelt closed to 420 meters on the Sina-class boat to port. The proximity was close enough that both crews could see each other clearly from their bridges. Roosevelt's Mark 38 25mm gun mount was trained in the direction of the Iranian boat. Not aimed, trained. The distinction matters, but at 420 meters, it is a distinction that requires close attention to perceive. The Sina-class boat on the port side began pulling away at 0704. By 0707, it had opened to 1,800 meters and was turning south. The Mauj-class frigate maintained its parallel shadow position for the remainder of the transit, 31 nautical miles, approximately 94 minutes at the reduced transit speed. At no point during that time did it make radio contact or alter its shadowing course. It turned southeast toward Bandar Abbas at 0842, when the carrier formation cleared the southern end of the strait into the Gulf of Oman. The Truman's transit of the Strait of Hormuz had taken 2 hours and 31 minutes. The emergency engine reversal had added 47 minutes to the transit time by reducing the formation's speed for the bulk of the passage. The 4 nautical mile stopping distance had displaced the carrier formation from its planned track. The entire event was logged, photographed, and formally reported within the hour. The public statement from 5th Fleet described an unsafe and unprofessional interaction by Iranian naval vessels. It confirmed that the transit had been completed successfully. It noted that the incident was being reviewed through appropriate channels. The classified incident report, reviewed at CENTCOM in the Pentagon the following day, was considerably more specific in its assessment. 3 findings stood out. The first, the Iranian formation's maneuver had been coordinated with precision that indicated prior planning and rehearsal. The timing of the Mujah's bow crossing maneuver, the positioning of the Sina boats on the carrier's beams, and the transition to a shadowing posture after the bow crossing were sequenced in a way that showed doctrine, not improvisation. Iran had planned this. Someone had authorized it at a level above a local field commander. The second, the 847-meter margin at bow crossing was not the minimum the Iranians had planned for. Post-incident analysis of the Mujah's engine room telegraph log, obtained through intelligence collection, indicated that the frigate's crew had been prepared to increase speed further if the carrier had not begun backing. The designed crossing margin was closer to 500 meters. The emergency backing by Truman's OOD had increased the actual margin from the planned 500 to the achieved 847. The third finding was the one that changed planning assumptions for subsequent strait transits. The attack submarine USS New Hampshire, running 8 nautical miles ahead of the formation, had detected a second submerged contact at 0637 before the surface confrontation began. The contact was tentatively classified as a possible Iranian Kilo-class submarine, transiting at slow speed on a heading that would have placed it in the carrier's projected track, approximately 12 minutes into the transit. New Hampshire shadowed the contact for 23 minutes. At 0700, the same moment the Mujah crossed Truman's bow, the submerged contact executed a radical maneuver and increased depth rapidly. New Hampshire lost the contact in the layer. The contact was not reacquired. The simultaneous surface confrontation and submerged contact were assessed post-incident as a coordinated operation. The surface ships were the distraction, drawing attention, forcing the formation out of its planned geometry, slowing the carrier, creating the kind of noise and confusion in the tactical picture that benefits a submarine trying to approach undetected during the disruption. The submarine contact was never confirmed. Its classification remained possible. It may have been an Iranian Kilo. It may have been an unusual biologics contact in a moment of high tactical stress. The track data was inconclusive. What was conclusive was the operational design that the Iranian action represented. The strait, with its restricted maneuvering space and predictable transit geometry, was being used as an ambush architecture. Surface ships to force a maneuver, a submarine, possibly, to exploit the confusion. All of it timed and coordinated to occur within the 21-mile confine where the carrier has no room to run. The transit protocols for carrier strait passage were reviewed at the highest level within 2 weeks of the incident. The advanced coordination timing was extended. The attack submarine's position was moved from 8 miles ahead to a closer escort geometry. ISR coverage during transit windows was increased. The formation's response to Iranian surface shadowing, including specific guidance on when to physically interpose destroyers between Iranian vessels and the carrier, was formalized in updated standing orders. And one additional change was made that has not been publicly disclosed. The emergency engine reversal that Truman's officer of the deck initiated at 702 seconds, acting on his own authority without waiting for the battle group commander's order, was formally reviewed. Under maritime law and U.S. Navy standing instructions, the OOD's action was legally correct. Under the tactical circumstances, it was the decision that increased the crossing margin from 500 meters to 847 meters. His action was recognized at a non-public ceremony 6 weeks after the incident. The Mujah-class frigate that crossed Truman's bow was observed back at Bandar Abbas 3 days after the incident. Satellite imagery showed it moored in its standard berth. No damage visible. Normal activity aboard and around the ship. The USS Harry S. Truman completed its deployment and returned to Norfolk on schedule. The Strait of Hormuz is still 21 miles wide. The next carrier transit is already planned, and somewhere in the IRGCN's operational planning cells, the analysis of what worked and what didn't on that morning is being incorporated into the next iteration of the doctrine. The surface confrontation forced a carrier to emergency back. The formation was disrupted. The submerged contact, if it was real, operated in a disrupted tactical picture rather than a clean one. The operation achieved what it was designed to achieve. That is the part of the story that the official statements don't say, and the part of the story that keeps naval planners working late. Stay vigilant, stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.